Today we're going to add one more tool to your toolbox. We're going to teach you and practice a simple gospel presentation using an illustration, drawing 3 circles, and it should take you about 3 minutes. But before we do that, I want to review where we've been over the last several sessions. We started out by defining the job that Jesus gave us. Jesus gave us the job of making disciples who obey all of his commandments, which means we need to make disciples who love God, disciples who love people, and disciples who make more disciples who do the same. Next, we try to understand, well, what's our part in that? What are our limitations? What do we do and what does God do? And Jesus says in John 6:44, no one can come to him unless the Father who sent him draws him. What that means is it's not our job to take people who are disinterested, people who are closed, and wrestle them and turn them into Christians. No, it's our job to look for the people whom God is drawing and then give them the information and encouragement they need to become a disciple who obeys Jesus. And we started to develop 3 basic habits, lifelong habits, that will allow us to find and to recognize those people. The first is just simply praying for people, choosing 5 people who are close to us and far from God, and praying for them every day that God will draw them, that God will give us opportunities to share with them. The second is praying with people out loud, and that is to listen to our friends and workmates as we go through life, to listen for them to talk about a need or a problem, and when they do, simply to offer to pray out loud for that right then and there. And then to observe their response to see if they seem to be open to things about God or not. The third is, as we go through life, to use gatepost statements to identify ourselves as people who really, really love God, and to watch for people to respond to those with interest or with disinterest. And then we started to add some tools to our toolbox. The first tool we practiced is sharing our story, sharing the story of what God has done in our life in about a minute. And then today we're going to add a second tool. The tool is the 3 circles, a simple way of explaining the gospel in about 3 minutes. Now, if you've been around the Christian world, you know there's about 1 million different ways of sharing the gospel. There's the 4 spiritual laws, there's evangelism explosion, all these different options. And we even see different ways of explaining the gospel in the New Testament. If you look at Acts chapter 17, there are 2 different gospel presentations that Paul gives. One to the Jews in Thessalonica in the synagogue, the second to philosophers in Athens on Mars Hill. And to me, it's very interesting to compare those 2 and to notice what's different, what's the same, and why. And we see the sermon in Thessalonica is very, very Jewish. Paul argues from the Old Testament prophecies that the promised Messiah had to suffer and die, and that Jesus, in fact, was the Messiah that had been promised to the Jews. The message on Mars Hill is very different. He doesn't quote the Old Testament scriptures. He doesn't talk about the promised Messiah. He starts with an altar that the Greeks had, that the Athenians had, acknowledging an unknown God. He quotes from Greek poets. But in the end, he concludes that God has proved by raising Jesus from the dead that Jesus is the person to whom we will all give account. And so it's different, but they all end up with Jesus. And here's what I think is the universal principle. When we share the gospel, we're going to start where people are, culturally, religiously. We're going to start where they are, and from there, we're going to build a bridge to Jesus. And that's what we're trying to do with the 3 circles. We're trying to start where people are today in today's America and build a bridge to Jesus. Now, we've given you 3 different presentations of the 3 circles. And what I want you to do is I want you to practice 3 times, to watch the first one and then practice yourself doing the 3 circles. To watch the second one, make any mental adjustments you want to make to your presentation, and then practice again the 3 circles. Watch the third one, which happens to be an 8-year-old girl named Emily, and then practice again the 3 circles. Each time you practice, start with a blank piece of paper. Draw the illustration out as you're explaining it, because the drawing of the illustration creates visual interest and helps you make the presentation better.
If you turn on the television or look at your Facebook feed, it's very clear that we live in a broken world. There's a lot of death, a lot of disease and suffering. But we also see traces of beauty, like the beauty of a sunset or the laugh of a child. And that's because God's design was perfect when He made it. There was no death or disease or suffering. But starting with the very first people, we as humans chose to go our own way and leave God's perfect design. And that's called sin. And sin is what led to brokenness in our world and us and sinfulness. Well, we don't like to be in brokenness, this state that we're born in. So we try to get out. So for some, they try to get out on their own by climbing the ladder of success at work or school, thinking that'll get them out. Others try to get out themselves by doing good things or being religious and going to church and helping people. And while those are great things, they don't get us out of brokenness. Some try to drown out the brokenness with drugs and alcohol or attempts at suicide or maybe even relationships. And these attempts to get out of brokenness ourselves end up snapping us back in like a bungee cord. But God loved us so much, He didn't want us to stay in brokenness. So He did for us what we could not do for ourselves. He provided the only way out. And that is through His Son, Jesus. You see, Jesus came down into our world and allowed Himself to be killed on a cross, taking on our sin. And 3 days later, He rose from the dead. And He declared that if anyone would turn from their way and surrender to Him and believe that Jesus came and died on the cross and rose from the dead, and would be willing to make Him their King or their Lord, that they would be forgiven and made new, and would then be able to experience God's perfect design for their life. Now I want to ask you, which of these 2 would you say you're in? Are you still in brokenness, or have you repented and believed in Jesus and are now back in His design? Okay, you're in brokenness. Well, which one of these 2 do you want to be in? Okay, great. Well, is there anything that keeps you from turning from your way and believing in the gospel of Jesus and making Him your Lord, your King? Okay, great. You know, when I chose to make this decision, I prayed a simple prayer, very similar to this picture. I just told God that I'm sorry for my sin, that I left your design, and for the ways that I've tried to get out of brokenness on my own. I'm ready to turn from my way and surrender to you. And I believe that this is true. And I want to make you my Lord so I can become new and experience your design for my life. Is that something you'd like to do? And then just pray with them. So this is the 3 Circles Gospel presentation.
Has anyone showed you the 3 circles before?
Have you heard of
3 circles before?
Has anyone ever shared
The 3 circles with you?
before?
No.
So this is the first circle. So this represents the world that's broken.
All of us live in a broken world.
You only have to turn on the news and see
Suffering, death,
war, sickness,
rape, disease, it's everywhere, right?
But you know, God didn't actually create the world to be like this, full of brokenness, eh? Here's the second circle.
This circle represents God's perfect design.
God's perfect design was a world without brokenness. A world full of love.
full of joy and peace and unity.
But what we did was we sinned.
Sin could be anything from lying to murder.
Wait, so like just like normal lying or like hard lying?
And what sin did, it separated us from God's perfect design and threw us into brokenness.
And so people try all kinds of different things to get out of brokenness. They might try drugs or alcohol.
Or maybe chasing a career or money.
Smoking. Even bullying other people at school.
Or sleeping around. Suicide, exactly, a good example. But it doesn't actually fix the problem of brokenness.
It's like a bungee cord. We just get snapped straight back into brokenness.
And ultimately, if people die in that state of brokenness and separated from God, and that means that that's eternal separation from God.
Do you know what this place is often called? Yes.
What God did was he didn't want to leave us in that place.
God loved us so much that he sent
His son Jesus to die on the cross.
Jesus was God, so he had no sin. And when he died and rose again, he actually took on all of our sin and cancelled it, like he crushed it.
He said if we would turn away from our sin and believe in Jesus and make Jesus
the Lord of our life, we become restored
back into God's original design.
And you become a new creation, a new person in Christ.
And will restore us back into relationship with him. So there's only two kinds of people in this world. People that are in brokenness or God's perfect design. Where would you see yourself?
Probably right there, to be honest.
This circle.
I'm not sure.
Love?
Brokenness?
Possibly love.
The bungee stage.
yeah, the same. And where would you like to
So where would you like to be? You'd like to be here? Yeah.
Right there. Middle of this star circle.
One with God.
So here? So is there anything that's stopping you?
From turning and believing in Jesus?
And allow him to be Lord and King of your life.
Stubbornness.
Probably not.
Probably weed, to be honest.
Nothing stopping me.
You know the awesome news about Jesus? He is the only way out.
If you try to clean yourself up before coming to Jesus, it's like trying to get clean before you take a shower.
Oh, I see, yeah, I get that.
Is there anything stopping you?
We shared the 3 circles with 34 people. 4 were already believers. 13 chose to remain in brokenness, but some were deeply impacted. And 17 wanted to leave brokenness and receive Christ. There are many powerful ways to share the gospel, and the 3 circles is a great place to start.
Hey, Uncle Lori, I will be showing you guys the 3 circles. We already have the 3 circles. So everyone was in a beautiful relationship with God, and the trees were there, the flowers were there, the plants were there, and everything was wonderful with God. But then the people chose, no, I'm going to have my own world. So they ran away from God. And there was brokenness in the world. And people were like, I'll buy candy. But first, they were like, I feel brokenness. So then the candy comes in. They were like, I'll buy candy. And I'll buy a mansion. And I'll buy money. And so God
well, what did it do when they bought the candy?
But that turned up bad.
What did it do? Did they get out of the brokenness?
No, they couldn't get out of the brokenness. So God was like, nope, I'm not going to let this happen. So he came down from heaven, died on the cross, and rose back up. It's a miracle. And so then that led the people to come back into a relationship with God. But how did they do that? How did they do that?
How did they get in a relationship with God?
Yeah, how did they get in a relationship with God? So they had how they would do that is they say, I'm sorry for all the bad things I've done. Thank you for dying on the cross for me, and please become the king of my life. So they let it hit. So that gave them a way to come into a relationship with them and go back into the world that they were in, and their body would be a new creation. But they would have to go back in the brokenness and share the gospel with Jesus, so more people could learn about Jesus, and that's why we pray.
Very good. So there's the 3 circles, right?
Complete.
After you conclude the 3 practices, your homework is to practice the 3 circles at least 3 more times this week. And you get extra credit if you train someone else how to do it. And that's it. That finishes this first set of videos. You now have the habits and the tools you need to identify the people God is drawing, to explain to them how God has worked in your life, to explain to them God's story, how it is that God has made a plan to save them and to give them the chance to receive Christ. At a future date, we'll be posting some additional videos that talk about how you can move from evangelism into discipleship. But I think this is enough for now. May God bless you as you put into practice what you've learned.